Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We're going to spend some time this hour talking about how to make America good again. That is the title of the book that came out just a few months ago. And if you think about this, almost everybody's upset about something. We are very divided. It is a politicized culture. And so what can we as Christians do individually and even collectively to begin to make a difference? And that's why I'm so excited about this book we're going to be talking about by our good friend Joe Battaglia. Make America Good Again, 12 and a half biblical principles to unite our nation, restore true greatness, and reshape our political rhetoric. Going to talk about some of the foundations of these very important issues, some of the key issues, and how to rise above them as well. Joe Battaglia has been on the program with us before. He's a broadcaster and author. We've talked about a couple of his books. President of Renaissance Communications, which is a media company that really provides media platforms for a number of communicators. And, of course, you might be familiar with him through his books as well as his radio program, Keep the Faith. Those of us in the area of Christian radio have known him for years, and it is always great to have you, Joe, back on Point of View.
Well, Kerby, very nice to be with you again. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's, if we can, maybe start out with this idea of good again. I appreciate the fact that you, like everybody else, acknowledge that Alexis de Tocqueville never said this, but nevertheless, we quote it all the time. And it is the idea that if America ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. No, he didn't say that. You can't find it in Democracy in America. Doesn't matter. It's a really good quote, and it really is, if you will, foundational to the book we're going to be talking about today.
No, absolutely. And, of course, that's how I came up with the title. You're right. It is not found in his 2-volume set. And the end part of that, if people are not familiar with it, I just want to read it for a second. And so this quote goes at the end of it: "Not until I went into the churches of America and heard her pulpits aflame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power. America is great because she is good, and if America ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great." So taking that, taking that from a little frog in my throat, sorry. Taking that from that context, I like to make the comment that, I'm sorry, that greatness is about achievement, while goodness is about character. And so we have lost that moral character to our country, it appears, and we really need to regain that. And so I talk about that in the book and ways in which to think through those principles. So that's how I came to the title and why I write.
Sure. Let me just mention that the first 4 chapters deal with what we call foundations and party platforms, and we're going to get into that in some detail, how the differences really make us stronger, e pluribus unum, and then we'll talk about us versus them, something we've talked about before when we've even done an evaluation of the book, The Coddling of the American Mind, and others. We'll look at some of the ideas, common ground, and a story that I've heard Joe share in the past, but we'll do again, and talk about tolerance. Then we're going to get into all sorts of issues, ranging from immigration and poverty and the environment and guns and fake news and the culture war, and then finally talking about rising above. But part of that, the differences make us stronger, is important to understand that, as people probably can tell from your last name, Your father and mother were born in Italy, and your father came over here, I guess, at the age of 17. And when we think about this, we are such a melting pot country and always have been. We'll get into some more of that later when we talk about immigration. But the differences, literally pulling people from all over the world to come to this country, is something that we have thought certainly is the case, that from one from many, the many differences that we have been brought together into one. But we don't, Joe, necessarily find that so much today in our world, which is one of the reasons why you wrote the book, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And that's part of the issue today, is that we're at this crossroad in our culture where intellectual dishonesty is at an all-time high. We pander to the lowest common denominator that cares little about truth, it seems, and more about disingenuous rants about tolerance while being intolerant, love without being loving, and inclusion while vehemently excluding those unlike you. So the idea, and you mentioned it, about the e pluribus unum in our country, which of course is from the many one, that's the genius of both our faith and our culture, that we are all different yet one, not that we are all the same and one. And so inherent to that motto that we have is the understanding of the importance of true plurality to the makeup of our country, and the necessity of having people who are different from each other speak into each other's lives. So yes, the real issue we face is the lack of appreciation of those differences, and we tend to hide behind these firewalls of emotional detachment that we have set up, whether on the internet or otherwise. When we separate ourselves from those unlike us, it's so much easier to blame everybody else now, other than ourselves. And so we miss God's grand design to mold us in his image, and associating with others unlike us is often God's way of opening our eyes to better see ourselves. So that struggle we have with people at work, whether we play and intersect with them, God uses that to bring us together to find common ground, which again is that genius to the e pluribus unum. We have lost that. There are reasons why we have lost that, and I really can get into some of those as we go along here. So happy to unpack some of that if you would like me to now, or if you have another question that leads into that, I'll be happy to do that.
Well, for a moment, I thought I might just mention the previous book that we talked about with you, Unfriended, Finding True Community in a Disconnected Culture, because that also sort of sets up chapter 2, the us versus them, because we really do see how social media has made this worse, haven't we?
Oh, we certainly have. As I said, we use the internet now as these firewalls of emotional detachment, as I call them. And so when we hide behind this, we become moral cowards. We are allowing ourselves to just be with people just like us, who think like us, look like us, act like us, and we never are able to get into the marketplace where we have a respect for others unlike us. And so, now everybody is offended because people just don't think just like them, and we've allowed all the politically correct police to structure our national narratives, which is just nonsense, of course. And so the us versus them mentality is something that we have to be very careful about. There's a reason why that has developed. It has to do a lot with the politically correct movements that have come up. It has to do with this new not really new, but the Marxist socialist agenda that is being promulgated now across the land.
Very good.
So that's something we've got to really understand as people of faith, that this just doesn't happen, right? There is a reason why the us versus them mentality is out there. So
okay. And we'll talk about that after the break, because I
Yep.
do want to get into that, because author of The Politically Incorrect Jesus, Unfriended, Finding True Community in a Disconnected Culture. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The U.S. Senate as an institution is sick and dysfunctional. Senator Ben Sasse, playing the role of physician, provides both an accurate diagnosis and recommended cures, but I fear that the Senate will prefer to remain sick. His first recommendation is to cut the cameras, since most of what happens in committee hearings isn't oversight, it's showmanship. Senators give speeches that are chopped up and shipped to local media. The senators aren't trying to learn, since they're actually competing for sound bites. Senator Sasse also wants to abolish standing committees. The current structure ends up being 20 permanent fiefdoms. Instead, he proposed temporary 2-year committees devoted to making real progress. His third recommendation is to pack the floor. Serious debate, he argues, only happens when senators show up. Most of the time, when you see a senator talking on the floor, he or she is speaking to a nearly empty chamber. Changing the rules to allow committees to control some floor time would bring senators to the floor to debate. Senator Sasse also calls for Congress to make a real budget. This certainly is a criticism of the House of Representatives, where revenue bills are to begin. Both houses of Congress have budget responsibilities, but the budget process is clearly broken. He also believes we should repeal the 17th Amendment. Ratified in 1913, this replaced the appointment of senators by state legislatures with direct election. The Senate was supposed to be less influenced by election and more responsible to the states. Although it is unlikely that this recommendation will ever be implemented, doing so would transform the U.S. Senate back into a deliberative body that it was supposed to be. The U.S. Senate should take seriously the proposals set forth by Senator Sasse. Unfortunately, I feel they will be ignored. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Talking with Joe Battaglia as we talk about the book, Make America Good Again, 12.5 Biblical Principles to Unite Our Nation, Restore True Greatness, and Reshape Our Political Rhetoric. And I did mention about some of your previous books, Unfriended, and the whole issue of political correctness. And in some respects, Joe, that's part of the difficulty, because people, as you said, are sort of in their own silos. They're in their firewalls of emotional detachment, as you call them, and people are saying things across the internet that they might not even say to people face to face. And as a result, we have difficulty dealing with what you talk about in the third chapter of finding common ground. And you found that even as you have tried to explain that to other people, as soon as they find that maybe there are a few, if you will, non-negotiables, they give up on trying to find common ground. And yet that is something that really is so necessary if we're going to actually be successful in this republic.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that one incident in particular, which you allude to about finding common ground, let me unpack that a bit for your audience, because I think it's important to see what happens when we stand our ground and try to find that common ground when we understand who Christ is in our life and who we go to represent. This happened some years ago, maybe 14 years ago at this point, and we had participated in a campaign, if you will, in the 2004 election that resulted in some of the media we had created to go into Ohio. It was a pro-life message by Jim Caviezel. It went into Ohio, into the heavily Catholic areas of Ohio, which turned out were the counties that turned Ohio for Bush, that turned the election for him. And so we were contacted later by progressives in D.C., wanted to know how we came up with that idea. That was totally providential. We just decided to send that around, and this is what happened. And make a long story short, they invited us to meet with them because they didn't know any other evangelicals. They wanted to see, and they said we were the only non-strident ones they knew, which could say something about them or the Christians they knew, but that's another discussion. And so we were invited to a very nice place in Georgetown there in D.C., which was a meeting of many of the top progressives in D.C., and we were kind of talking with them, and they asked us questions on how to find common ground on some key issues, because they seemingly wanted to know either what we were thinking or how to truly find that common ground. And then someone asked me what was the evangelicals' middle ground on abortion. I said, well, there is no middle ground on abortion. And he immediately interrupted me and said, see, there's no talking with you people. I said, well, I think you're asking the wrong question. It's not middle ground, because that infers, of course, that there is a middle ground on when life begins, and there can't be. That doesn't make any sense to us, nor does it make any biblical sense. And so I said, what you're asking is not about middle ground, it's about common ground. If we can start on the premise that we don't think abortion is good, let's start there. And so we had a nice discussion about that, and went on into the evening with other discussions. And so after that, the head of the progressive think tank in D.C. called Third Way came up to me afterward and wanted to have breakfast with me in the morning. And when we met then, he said he found what we had to say rational and really appropriate for the conversation. And would I be interested in writing a term paper? Really, that's what it amounted to. They called it a white paper on what is the common ground with evangelicals on certain key issues like abortion, immigration, gay rights, things like that. And so I did. I wrote what amounted to was like a term paper, and presented it to them. And they at least heard the evangelical side of why we believe biblically the reasons for these particular issues. The person to whom I really was responding to during that time of that writing became a really good friend. She and I are still friends. She had become really interested in how we would think as evangelicals, now knows the evangelical mindset, and now has assumed a very influential position in D.C. with an organization that we would not think would be too friendly to evangelicals. But because of the relationship we established and the understanding, right, the common ground that we were able to develop between each other, that is less of an issue in her mind than it would be with someone else. So the idea is that Jesus gives us principles for these things. And I think one of the greater illustrations of that is the parable of him with the woman at the well. Here is a Jewish man going into Samaria, which real Jews did not do because that was just not appropriate, because the Samaritans were the half-breeds, not considered real Jews. And then he addresses a Samaritan woman, which is even worse. But we know the end result. That discussion led to her going back and talking to her whole village about who Jesus was. So the principle is that when we go out of our way to be with people unlike us, they will go out of their way to tell people about us. And not only will they allow that, they will allow us to talk to them about what we believe. And like I said, with this group in D.C., they had never spoken to an evangelical.
Yes. And
so
that says a lot right there.
Common ground's important.
Sure. One other aspect before we take a break is the chapter on tolerance, because I will be the first to admit that there is a real need for us to certainly be gracious. And as you point out in one of the earlier chapters, oftentimes people know us for what we're against, not what we're for. But even sometimes when we are gracious and we're civil, sometimes we have this political correctness now that says a disagreement is not an opportunity for constructive dialogue. A disagreement illustrates that you're engaged in a hate crime. And so it isn't that you are incorrect, it is that you are evil. So it almost says that we have to go out of our way to be even more gracious and, if you will, tolerant, and maybe even create a safe environment for some discussion, because we have a whole generation of young people that are told that anybody that you disagree with needs to be warning you about trigger warnings. You need to have safe places and safe spaces and things of that nature. And so in some respects, it kind of gets back to some of the things you've written about in terms of civility, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And the reality is that those things do not create anything but more mistrust and dissension. You see, I think it's important to back up a second and help people understand what is really going on in our culture, in the spirit that people bring into these discussions, right? The politically correct movement actually started in Europe. There had to be a bad guy and a good guy because it kind of had to mesh with Marxism and then socialism as that evolved. And the whole point of finding a good guy and a bad guy was the premise for that relationship, because people were oppressed and they had, to rally against the people that, the elite of Europe who really enslaved a lot of people. There was a lot of oppression. And so the whole point of Marxism, as you know, is to create this us versus them mentality between the proletariat, the worker, and the capitalist, the bourgeoisie, and all that. And so we have to understand that the spirit we bring into something is the same spirit that is received at the other end by the person consuming it. So the whole spirit of that Marxist thought, the politically correct movements, were to develop us versus them. You can see how different and antithetical that is to the gospel message of reconciliation, of personal accountability, right? And personal culpability. And so I'm going the extra mile for somebody.
What
and so the reason all this is going on today is because the whole spirit of it is not to create reconciliation or to find answers or social justice or whatever other cute term that people say is the reason.
It's just to divide us, and to really put us in a situation where there's division. We need to take a break, and when we come back, I want to maybe take some of these principles, because your middle section deals with all sorts of really important issues like immigration, poverty, the environment, and much more, the culture war. So, again, if you find yourself saying, I'd like to read this book, it's been out for a while, you can probably find it in your local bookstore, but we have a link on our website, pointofview.net. Make America Good Again. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation talking about how we can make America good again, and some of these biblical principles are ones that we need to apply. Joe Battaglia with us. The book came out a couple of months ago. It's published by Broad Street. You may be able to find it in your local bookstore, but if not, we have a link so that you can find it there. Of course, also a link to his website. But I thought, Joe, we might, if we can, try to apply some of the things we've been talking about to the second section of your book, and that is on these key issues. I'm holding up now one of the booklets that we've made available here on a biblical point of view on immigration, and you are perfect to write on this for a couple of reasons. First of all, a son of former immigrants, but also I think you understand that the placards and the statements are a little bit insufficient. When we start thinking about an issue like immigration, we have to recognize that we have, on the one hand, a number of passages, and you quote, for example, Leviticus, and I can quote many others that talk about how in the Old Testament theocracy, the Israelites were to treat aliens and sojourners. Also, you take us into the New Testament as well, but then we also have the other principle of the fact that we are to obey government, Romans 13. And so in some respects, these passages that sometimes get wrenched out of context or simply put on a placard or made as a statement fail to understand kind of the complexity of these issues and the need to really develop a Christian world and life view. What are your thoughts?
Yep. Well, I would certainly agree with you on that. Let me add a little twist to all of that. Certainly when Jesus is confronted by people about the taxes, he makes a very good point that there is no either or situation. It's not either Caesar or God. It's Caesar and God. Mm-hmm. And so that talks about, to me, the principle of being involved in the marketplace, in the things of government and the things of the world that are Caesar's, because that's the very reason we are salt and light, isn't it? It's not to salt and light the people who already are salt and light. It's to be in the marketplace and to exhibit the kind of intelligence and wisdom that Jesus exhibited so that others can hear and see things that they otherwise would not know because the Holy Spirit is not the one revealing those things to them. And so it's important that we're in that marketplace in the context, trying to act out biblical principles. And so that's important. So you should be in the marketplace. I think, and certainly as the son of immigrants, growing up in an immigrant family was delightful for me because the idea was that you were no longer from one part of the world. You retained all those things that were part of you and proud of that, and then you embraced the e pluribus unum of America. And so the reality was that you would be so happy to be here. You would be so proud to be here. You understood, though, that life could be harder here as an immigrant. Mm-hmm. Also, and that's what my parents found out. I talk about in my book how my father, as a kid, when he came here, at 17, he grew up a lot of his young adult life, right? And it was like Mayberry from when he told me, you're in the mountains by the sea, nobody bothers you, you grow your own food, you're self-sustaining. All they wanted was for Mussolini to, get the trains to run on time, which is true, and then to protect them. They didn't want anything else from the government, right? They understood that it was their responsibility to take care of themselves and their neighbors. And so that's what I grew up with. So you have a different kind of ethic that you understand that government is supposed to keep you secure. It's supposed to help you in certain ways, but it's really about you contributing to make the nation great, not the other way around. You're not supposed to just make the government give you everything so that you are content. It's about you doing what you can. It's sort of like the old John F. Kennedy line in his speech, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So they understood that. So that's an important thing that may be missing in some of the discussions today, that it's not about just providing everything. It's about providing the freedom so that you can provide for yourself. And that's an important thing. When people truly become free, they are free to do what they are wired to do, what God has created them to do. They want to embrace capitalism because that's a very biblical model of creating goods and services, because the Creator himself asked us to create and to do things, right? And so when we act like the principles that God creates in us, then we become more like him. Jesus comes down from heaven to earth to show us that earth is a temporal training ground for the eternal. So I try to help people understand the difference there. And then I think it's important for all of us, certainly as believers, to understand the biblical principles that we are all aliens and strangers and refugees. It's replete throughout the Old Testament. Jesus certainly alludes to that we are not here. This is not our true home. And so I like to mention that if we understood that the greatest immigration story is God leaving heaven to come to earth in the form of his son, Jesus, and that Jesus is the ultimate immigrant. Well, I think that puts another spin or perspective on what are we to then say about who we are. How what that should do is speak to our mindset and to our hearts, to say that this world we live in does not hold for me what my real world holds for me. And it's really a spiritual and emotional world that we are to bring and to exhibit what we have. So I like to think myself, as the immigrant always, right? We have a community of people who see that we don't have to hold on to things so tightly. I interviewed Corey ten Boom once, and it was a wonderful privilege to do that. And she said to me a line that I have never forgotten: don't hold on to anything so tightly that Jesus can't take it from you. And so I think when we have a mentality that we are to be involved in the government because Jesus says that we are to give to Caesar and give to God concurrently, simultaneously, there's no division there, there's no tension between the two, that we are to understand ourselves as immigrants, because that helps us become better citizens, because we then want to contribute. We then see personal responsibility as imperative for the way in which we act, and our nation then becomes better because we give, we sow. I always like to say that, some people reap what they sow, and some people reap what other people sow, and some people and others reap what you sow. So the issue is just sow.
Yes.
God gives the increase. So if we just keep sowing, God will give the increase. We don't have to worry about it, in a sense, because we can take credit for the increase rather than giving credit to God who sustains us. So I think those are the kinds of things I like to talk about, that we truly understand what an immigrant is, what his responsibility is, how he looks at the world emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, because Jesus was the ultimate immigrant. He is our ultimate model. He's a good one to follow.
I would think so. And I might just mention that was on the chapter on immigration, but also relates to very much some of the things that you have in the chapter on poverty. We need to take a break. When we come back, though, I thought we'd talk about the culture war and the answer to the culture war, because those are two themes. But there's a real great turn of phrase that you use in that chapter we were looking at there, in which you were talking about the gospel. And I love this turn of phrase. The inclusiveness of the gospel best illustrates the exclusiveness of its design. Everyone is welcome because everyone's a refugee. We're all in the same boat on the way to the heavenly shore. That's the inclusiveness of the message, and yet it's exclusive to the people who embrace it. And it was just a great turn of phrase, and it's one of those that kind of surfaces out of the book. But we need to take a break. When we come back, have a whole chapter that deals with the culture war, and then a follow-up one which talks about an answer to the culture war, forgiveness. And so we're going to get into that issue of the culture war. And let me just say that if you find yourself saying, well, there's a lot of great material in the book, believe me, we haven't even covered half of it. There are 12 and a half chapters, if you want to count it that way, and we've maybe talked about less than half of them overall, but we'll try to do a little bit better to cover a few other things near the end. And if you're interested in the book, you can probably find it in your local bookstore, but we have a link so you can get it in paperback or Kindle, and we'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Joe Battaglia with us as we talk about his book, Make America Good Again, 12 and a half Biblical Principles to Unite Our Nation and Restore True Greatness and Reshape Our Political Rhetoric. One of your chapters deals with this whole idea of a culture war, which is very important. And then you do take the time to then point out how forgiveness can be an answer to this idea of a culture war. And we are in the midst of a culture war, even though sometimes people don't use that phrase anymore. I appreciated the fact that you put it in your book. And how are we as Christians to think about this conflict of worldviews and this conflict of ideologies that we're seeing almost every day?
No, that's a great question, Kerby. I think this is one of the hardest things for us as believers to get our arms around, because we understand that part of the reason we are in such a desperate situation morally in our country today is that we have lost our moral compass, as I call it. And when you lose your moral compass, you lose your common sense. That's what I believe. And I think similar to what Moses experienced when he left the camp, right? In Exodus 32, the public square of that day began to fill up with people dancing around idols of their own creation,
Yes.
fashioned to fit their own lifestyles and cravings, and ultimately, with no moral restraint, chaos ensues. Well, does that look familiar? Look at Seattle, Portland, and a bunch of other cities. And so that's what happens when God's presence leaves the camp. We lose the moral compass. We lose our common sense. And so that's why those of us who have not drunk the Kool-Aid look at what's going on and say, what in the world is going on? Well, the reality is that when you lose your common sense, you're only left with nonsense, things that make no sense at all. So that's a premise for all this on the culture war. I think we also have to be careful as believers because, when you fight a war, you can't have a war without an enemy, right? So we have to be careful who we deem is the enemy, because Scripture tells us that we only have one enemy, and we know who he is. And so we have to be careful that when fighting the, quote, culture war, we fight with a different principle. We don't fight with the same weapons that the world fights with. We can't fight back with anger and hate and act similarly because we're called to a higher standard than that. We are called to fight back with, again, I mentioned earlier, our involvement in the marketplace as salt and light. We can fight back with truth. We have to fight back in a sense when we believe that the Spirit in me, the Holy Spirit, will be able to defend himself against other people and other spirits that come against him. And so we've got to be able to understand how we fight. We have to understand that there is a fight, who the real enemy is, and how do we then approach that so that we don't become like everybody else, because let's face it, you're not going to hate people into loving you. You're not going to anger people into accepting Jesus. That doesn't work like that. It is kindness which leads to repentance. We read that in Romans. So I certainly believe that we should engage in the political arena, affirm those biblical principles, work to implement laws that reflect those principles, keep God in the public square, model Christ's behavior, understand who the real enemy is, and then go full steam ahead and go at it. Because as Christians, our main objective is to help each other find Christ and become better humans, not better political allies. So I think there's a perspective that I try to unpack in that particular chapter about how to fight the culture war, because there certainly is a war going on, and to deny that would be to deny anything that is around us that's obvious, right? So I think as evangelicals, we often might use our faith as an excuse to not get involved or just denounce things and people who would stand against our biblical worldview. So it's one thing to disagree, and then it's another to angrily contend in the marketplace with mean spirits towards those with whom we disagree. So I think we just have to be careful. I understand it's difficult. I find the spirit of anger rising up in me sometimes when I see all the nonsense around us, but then I have to ask the Holy Spirit to help me through that and past that, because I know prayer is probably going to achieve much more than my petty anger. And so I think we need to understand, and I use a line that I often say, that when you raise the flag higher than the cross, you have a problem. And so I always want to raise the cross highest because I know where the power lies. I know who the enemy is, and I need to go after him with the right weapons.
You know, again, in 2 Corinthians 10, it talks about the weapons of our warfare. Of course, are not of flesh or not carnal, but certainly give us divine power. And, of course, recognize what those weapons are. You've talked about prayer. Of course, you have a chapter here on forgiveness, graciousness, love, and the rest. But since we only have a minute or two left, I thought we might, Joe, talk about how people can use this book, because obviously any of our listeners can get a copy of the book, read it through, and appreciate this. But the way you've actually broken it down, especially in 12 chapters plus a final one that gives it 12 and a half chapters. I love that, 12 and a half biblical principles. Really, this could be an ongoing small group Bible study or a variety of other things. And during this political season, I think this book is very relevant. But even after we have had an election, we're still going to be dealing with most of the issues you address in the book. So it seems to me that you've written it in such a way that it could be an individual study, or it can even be a group study, couldn't it?
Oh, it certainly can. I've written Bible study material for this that is available. I'm getting it together pretty soon, so people can go to my website, joebattaglia.com, and look for something and ask for it. And I'm always happy to provide people with information. So, I think it's important that if people want to use the book, I believe and I hope and I trust that the things I have written about will help you pause to think about your faith, how important it is to apply that faith, and to really trust that Christ is our North Star, our moral compass, and that we get our marching orders from Him.
Very good.
I don't get it from anybody else. To take time and build principles for ourselves that will help us through, which is a very difficult time in our country now. We really need wisdom that is from above, right? As James would say, if we lack it, pray, ask, but it has to be done from a heart of peace and pure heart.
Yes.
And so that's what I would hope people take from all this, that everything around us is very real. We just cannot run away from it. We must face it head on, but we have to do it in a certain way so that when people hear us talk, they hear the Holy Spirit, not us. They sense the Spirit's kindness, not our dislike and our hatred. So that's what I hope people take from all this.
Very good. The book, again, Make America Good Again. Joe Battaglia with us. We have a link to the website. Of course, you can just go to joebattaglia.com, but if you don't know how to spell it or don't have a chance to write that down, we have that on our website, pointofview.net. And as he points out, there would be some other material that you could use there as well. So, Joe, as always, we appreciate you being on the program with us today.
Oh, well, Kerby, always a pleasure. Thank you for your graciousness, and to your listeners, thank you for the privilege of your attention.
Let's, if we can, just again encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. You might be able to find the book in your local bookstore, but we have information about it there. We also have a link to his website, and you might want to take advantage of some of those additional resources for a Bible study. And you've been listening to Point of View.
"2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Wednesday edition of Point of View, and I am really looking forward to so many really great interviews we're going to be doing today. Plus, we'll give you a little bit of an update on some things that have been happening in the news. First off, we're going to be talking to our good friend Marjorie Dannenfelser about her new book, Life is Winning: Inside the Fight for Unborn Children and Their Mothers. The End of Abortion is Within Reach. And it is a very good book that you will appreciate. First of all, a foreword by Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was on with us just the other day, and an introduction by the Vice President Mike Pence. It was something scheduled, but boy, that's really appropriate in light of the fact that we have a vacancy on the Supreme Court. Speaking of that a little bit later, I will be talking about all the misinformation and mud already being thrown at individual that most likely is the individual that will indeed be nominated by the president, although we can't be sure. But Amy Coney Barrett, we want to clarify some of the misinformation that has been going around about her. And we'll also talk about some decisions that have been made in places like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania that almost guarantee that the election will go into overtime. And then next hour, we'll be spending some time talking with our good friend Greg Laurie about his book, World Changers, and about the crusades that have been taking place. And we'll wind down with Ron Smedley talking about Recovery Sunday and some of the real challenges we have with the drug culture. But first of all, it is my pleasure to bring back to the microphone Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List. Also this year was named the national co-chair of Pro-Life Voices for Trump. And if you aren't familiar, she, of course, has been so involved in the pro-life movement for many years. Also sits on the board of the Alliance Defending Freedom Life Perspectives Task Force, a graduate of Duke University, and an individual that we always enjoy having on the program. So, Marjorie, thank you for joining us, and congratulations on the new book.
Thank you so much. And what a lineup you have. That sounds like a great dinner party at Kerby's house.
We're going to enjoy it. Let's spend some time talking with you because, again, we can't cover all the book in a half an hour, but it's interesting because the first two chapters talk about your conversion. Chapter 1 is kind of your conversion from being kind of pro-choice to pro-life. I thought we'd talk about that for a little bit. And then the second chapter, which I really enjoyed because in some respects, you and I have talked about this before, when you heard about this candidate, Donald Trump, you were even starting to argue with people that were pro-life who are supporting him. Well, what are you doing? And now I think most people would appreciate the fact that Marjorie Dannenfelser has said that he's probably the most pro-life president we've ever had. So talk about those two conversions because they were very significant. One in your life and number two at the whole Susan B. Anthony list.
I appreciate you for forming the question in that way because I always thought, since getting to know this president, what a symmetry it is. You know, we both were converts, and we, both stumbled into it. God opening doors, and with the zeal of a convert, kind of got about the business of doing the work that needed to be done, but with very different backgrounds. So mine was very pro-choice, but I was a Republican, kind of like him, and I really thought that abortion could be a good and moral choice, something that would eliminate a barrier to my personal freedoms, my ambitions, my plans. I actually thought at one point that I was going to, quote, need one, and it was on the first day of freshman year at Duke University, and I went through the whole thought process. I knew exactly what I was going to do, went up to the Bryan Center, got in the telephone booth like they used to have and called the doctor. And as it turns out, I did not, quote, have to get an abortion, but I would have. And so the gift to me is that process. First of all, the shallowness of the mantra, my body, my choice, and how that just clears the decks of any thinking whatsoever about what you might be doing. How your instinct is to set it aside. You're not thinking at all unless somebody comes and intervenes, thinking at all about any option. And there was no way that I was going to, in my own mind at that point, become a mother and stop my education for 4 years. By the grace of God, I did not have to make that choice. And so, but the conversion, I think, probably began there. And because later I would look back at those moments and gasp with how little I thought about what that action truly meant. And I thought I was a good and moral person. So it says to me there are a lot of good and good people out there that have not really taken this by the collar and really looked deep into the issue and think, really, what is this? What is an abortion? And I went on and, my mind was changed. I studied philosophy, which is a significant factor in helping me learn how to think. And then also just great human beings, Kerby, like the people listening right now, who just were kind and planted seeds, and then they grew with God's grace. That was my conversion. The president's, I think, one thing is it's true. Maybe he'll write about it one day. But conversions are tricky things.
Mm-hmm.
Like you kind of just arrive there. Like, okay, I'm supposed to be here. And then, okay, God, you handle the rest. And so we get there, we'll make that leap of faith. And then the rest, your heart and your skills and all that stuff catches up later. And so I think that's what I've seen in this president, my friend. And he's very careful, Kerby. I'm sure you've noticed he's very careful in how he talks about it. He does not want to screw it up. Doesn't want to mess it up. And so he is the only issue that he's fairly scripted on and doesn't tweet about unless he's really careful with his words.
Yes. Let me for just a minute say that there was one part where I just almost started laughing out loud, and it's when you were going through this, trying to evaluate this guy, Donald Trump, and then you find out that Chuck Laudner, who was a political operative who had worked with Rick Santorum and always worked for the biggest pro-life candidate, was supporting Donald Trump. And you then kind of sit down on your living room sofa with I guess would be, this is where I started laughing, a rather animated conversation on the phone about, come on, is Trump even pro-life? Would he defund Planned Parenthood? And of course, then you kind of take us through this. One thing I love about the book is, first of all, I've known you pretty well, but I learned a whole lot about you. But I can just kind of walk through the story of how you are saying this man can't be that pro-life. And now anybody who's heard you speak, you say, I guess I was wrong because he turned out to be the most pro-life president in my lifetime.
It's my favorite time being wrong. My favorite time. There's a long list, but this is top favorite time being dead wrong. That particular story Chuck Laudner is a great American, a sacrificial political hero. And, he's always the guy in Iowa that knows every crevice of Iowa, knows every town, knows where everybody lives. You need him on your campaign if you're going to run. And he's always chosen the most socially conservative guy or girl. and I know him. And so when I heard that he was on the Trump campaign, I felt totally betrayed. Like, how could you? And I called him up and I said exactly that. This is such a betrayal. How could you do that? How in the world would you make the leap of faith with no promises whatsoever? And yes, and is he going to defund Planned Parenthood? What makes you think he would do something like that?
Let me jump in because we have to take one of those mandatory breaks. I want to hear the rest of the story because it's a funny story. And then I want to get into something else because you have been saying for years that pro-lifers need to go on the offense. And then you watch this candidate, Donald Trump, go on the offense. So we'll talk about that. Another great insight in this book, Life is Winning. We'll talk more about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The U.S. Senate as an institution is sick and dysfunctional. Senator Ben Sasse, playing the role of physician, provides both an accurate diagnosis and recommended cures, but I fear that the Senate will prefer to remain sick. His first recommendation is to cut the cameras, since most of what happens in committee hearings isn't oversight, it's showmanship. Senators give speeches that are chopped up and shipped to local media. The senators aren't trying to learn, since they're actually competing for sound bites. Senator Sasse also wants to abolish standing committees. The current structure ends up being 20 permanent fiefdoms. Instead, he proposed temporary 2-year committees devoted to making real progress. His third recommendation is to pack the floor. Serious debate, he argues, only happens when senators show up. Most of the time when you see a senator talking on the floor, he or she is speaking to a nearly empty chamber. Changing the rules to allow committees to control some floor time would bring senators to the floor to debate. Senator Sasse also calls for Congress to make a real budget. This certainly is a criticism of the House of Representatives, where revenue bills are to begin. Both houses of Congress have budget responsibilities, but the budget process is clearly broken. He also believes we should repeal the 17th Amendment. Ratified in 1913, this replaced the appointment of senators by state legislatures with direct election. The Senate was supposed to be less influenced by election and more responsible to the states. Although it is unlikely that this recommendation will ever be implemented, doing so would transform the U.S. Senate back into a deliberative body that it was supposed to be. The U.S. Senate should take seriously the proposals set forth by Senator Sasse. Unfortunately, I feel they will be ignored. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, talking with Marjorie Dannenfelser. Again, the book is entitled Life is Winning, Inside the Fight for Unborn Children and Their Mothers. And the foreword by Sarah Huckabee Sanders, an introduction by Vice President Mike Pence. The end of abortion is within reach. And, of course, this was written before we knew there was going to be this particular opening on the Supreme Court that we've been talking about. And if you go to her website, sba-list.org, you will find out something else. The most pro-life Republican National Convention in history. Abby Johnson, Nick Sandman, a variety of other individuals that were all speaking. Of course, the various individuals that we've had a chance to hear from. And if nothing else, it illustrates that even though you were wrong, you were pleased that you were wrong, because not only a pro-life president, but a pro-life Republican National Convention. And what a contrast, Marjorie, to a Democratic National Convention where I'm not even sure the word abortion ever got mentioned.
It wasn't at all. And doesn't that speak volumes? It's a flip script from the last from when Romney won, when he ran. I'm sorry, where really the Republican convention did all that it could, and actually, frankly, when the president won his primary for the presidency too, where the habit of the Republican Party, always on defense on this issue, was to always bury it and to hope it never came up, and if it did come up, well, just say something really quick and then move on to another topic that is better for you, because this is a killer of an issue. It'll kill you. That was the conventional wisdom, and it was indeed conventional. It was not forward-looking. It wasn't thoughtful about how powerful this issue is when communicated in a winsome way and also in a way to unite people. So this Democratic convention was the opposite. They took the Republicans' old job of burying it because right now it is working against the voters that they need to bring into the fold in electoral votes in battleground states. And so so in our convention, as you communicated beautifully, it was not only in the beautiful pro-life speakers that spoke, it was woven in places that wasn't even that weren't specifically pro-life speeches. So it's now recognized as the DNA. It's in the sinews of the Republican Party in a way that it never has. And that's why the book is called Life is Winning. It's because going on offense, being proud of the beautiful cause that we embrace is the way to make it win, and not to be afraid of it and bury it and hide your light under a bushel. This president is the one that led that whole process of digging it out of the closet and holding it up in the light of day, contrasting it with the other party, and winning, showing that when you do the right thing, it's also the politically smart thing to do.
Let me just also mention that the introduction by Vice President Mike Pence, of course, is someone you have known for some time. You talk about the fact that you really encouraged him to run for president in 2012. Instead, he ran for governor. But this is the individual who is also behind the president, who also led the effort to defund Planned Parenthood, has been consistently pro-life. And so even for the skeptics out there that say, well, is Donald Trump just doing it because he doesn't believe it? Well, first of all, I have trouble accepting that argument, but the point is you have had an even longer relationship with Mike Pence, who is, again, the one that has been dealing with what used to be called the Mexico City policy and the Hyde Amendment and all sorts of other things, and you've been in those battles with him for many years, and I was gratified to see that he wrote the introduction to your book.
Yes, me too. That friendship and partnership has been going on for a long time. He was the first author of the defund Planned Parenthood bill in the House. When it was really unpopular, no one would touch it. That one was completely buried, too, at the time. And what he did, I believe, first of all, this president truly respects him. They have a relationship that they are completely different from each other, and therefore they are very complementary of each other because they're in very, very different ways moving in the same direction. I actually talked to the president yesterday, and he talked like I didn't even bring up the vice president. He just talked about how great he was and how much he meant to him, especially from the pro-life perspective. But so that skepticism that we were discussing about Trump originally, especially, was really abated to a certain extent when the vice president became the vice presidential running mate. When Pence was named as that running mate, it was helpful. But what was super helpful and necessary in order to get our support was a list of commitments that he signed with his name. And not only did he write that list of commitments out, but he made the letter very strong in its clarity and the contrast with Hillary Clinton. And so that list of commitments, that piece of paper that has his iconic signature, became the fulcrum around which every single thing in the campaign turned, and how we could appeal to pro-life voters who were skeptical. Now, in this election, he's got promises fulfilled. Everything that is in his power to do, including today with a Born Alive executive order, saving babies who might not be given care otherwise, requiring that they be given care when they're in emergency room areas. He's done everything and beyond that has been in his power to do, and has surrounded himself, yes, with the vice president, but thoroughgoing in every department and in the White House, strong, faithful pro-life people everywhere you look.
Just before I let you go, one of the things I want people to do is go to sba-list.org. And one of the things they'll see is that you have been talking about the fact that the successor to the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that this successor might provide a real turning point in the history of abortion. How so?
That's the moment we're in. I mean, it's breathtaking that now we're looking at the third justice that this president would nominate, and that we could possibly see Roe unraveling around the corner with cases headed towards the Supreme Court. And when that day happens, states will be allowed, like Texas has not been allowed to do, to enact the laws that reflect the will of those states. Ultimately, we need national laws that protect life, of course. But that initial unwinding and overturning of Roe means that thousands and thousands and thousands of children, hundreds of thousands, will be saved every year. And that is think of the moment we're in. We are now partners in every other human rights battle that has been successful in this nation. We should think about those people and think how we share that bond with them. And it's not over, okay? So on Saturday, that person will be announced that will take that vacancy in the court. And then there's a lot of work to be done. But this is the next necessary step. So, oh boy, Kerby, this is a time for prayer. I was just talking to Lindsey Graham. He asked for our prayers because he's got the job of his lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So prayer is the big request right now.
Talk about what people will find when they go to your website, because, again, Susan B. Anthony list is one that has been reaching out to millions of voters about pro-life issues and supporting pro-life candidates. And it does seem to me that most of our listeners are probably familiar with you and the Susan B. Anthony list, but there are probably some new listeners, new radio stations that need to know what is available on the website.
Yeah, you'll find how to continue to increase that muscle so that we win this next election, for one thing. In battleground states where we're talking to voters, there's information about how to get involved in that. There's also education through our education arm about any issue under the sun that's relevant. Think of chemical abortion, other issues. We have scientists and credentialed academics doing all the papers and all the background on that. And really most urgent and importantly right now is, along with the election, is a Protect the Court piece of our website where we have a whole coalition of national pro-life organizations working together to make sure that this next nominee is surrounded with support practically and support in prayer.
I might just mention, too, that you have this National Pro-Life Scorecard, and we're on a couple of dozen different states and more than 250 radio stations, and so you may not really necessarily know how one of your elected representatives stands on the pro-life issue, and that is another place that you can find that. And if you'd like to get a copy of the book, I would imagine you should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but if not, of course, you can also go to that website and get it, as we've mentioned before, in hardback or Kindle and all sorts of other great resources. So, Marjorie, thank you for writing the book. Thank you for giving us some time today on Point of View, and I look forward to the next opportunity when we talk about a new Supreme Court justice.
Me too. It's always fun and a delight to talk to you, Kerby. Thanks for the time.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, one of the articles I've posted, very good piece on 6 things to know about Supreme Court prospect Amy Coney Barrett. She may or may not be the nominee, although most people think that she might be. And because of that, the knives are already out for somebody who's not even been nominated yet. And so I want to clarify and correct some really egregious errors and, if you will, journalistic malpractice that needs to take place. We also have a piece here which I may or may not get to, Trump and the Nobel Peace Prize, or have some people say that if Donald Trump does not win the Nobel Peace Prize for what has been able to be accomplished in the last couple of months, then we should just no longer have a peace prize, but we'll see how that plays out. Not holding my breath on that. And most importantly, we're going to look at evidence that the election is going to go in overtime.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
As program note, let me just mention next hour we're going to be talking with Greg Laurie, and then a little bit later with Ron Smedley. Greg Laurie, of course, will be talking about the various Harvest Crusades and the impact that the most recent kind of virtual crusade has had. Ron Smedley will be with us as we talk about the fact that this Sunday is Recovery Sunday, and so we'll talk about the need for churches to reach out in the midst of the opioid epidemic and a variety of other aspects of drug culture. So those will all be topics that we will be addressing next hour. If you go to our website, one of the things we do is post a number of articles. The first one I want to talk about, 6 things to know about Supreme Court prospect Amy Coney Barrett. Now, she may not be the nominee, but most people assume that she will, as evidenced by the fact that something else that I did not post, but I will get into, is the fact that she's already been attacked and unfairly. As a matter of fact, there have been people that have conflated an organization she's part of with another organization that supposedly was the justification for writing that very interesting, Handmaiden's Tale, which actually it wasn't the justification for that either. Hopefully we won't get into the deep weeds about that, but that's the first article. We also have one on the 1619 Project, and I'll mention that a little bit later this hour if we have some time, but simply pointing out here by Beckett Adams that now, because of all the criticism that the 1619 Project tied into the New York Times and winning the Pulitzer Prize, and Nicole Hannah-Jones has had, they're changing what they actually originally have said, but they don't admit that they've changed it. They're just pretending that nobody saw it in the first place because of the controversy surrounding that. And then a piece that is by Gail Trotter, and the Nobel Peace Prize if Trump doesn't win. It's interesting. There are now people starting to talk about maybe we should cancel having the Nobel Peace Prize. And maybe part of the reason is because, as the Norwegian official who actually nominated President Trump indicated, he's the first president in 39 years to not start a war or bring the United States into an international conflict. Not to mention the fact that we also talk about moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and putting together a peace agreement that is the first one in decades with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. So we'll get into some of that as well. And before this half hour is up, also want to talk about why it's virtually certain now that the election will go into overtime, that on the night of November 3rd, we probably will not know who the president is unless there is just a real landslide in a couple of those swing states. And I'll look at what is happening in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania in just a minute. Well, let's get to Amy Coney Barrett. She is an individual that you need to know more about, especially if she does become the nominee. 6 points real quickly that was actually put together by our friends at the Daily Signal. Number 1, she made history on the Seventh Circuit. She is now on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals and actually came into that position about 3 years ago, October 31st, 2017, became the first and only woman from Indiana to hold the seat on the appeals court, which covers also cases in Illinois and Wisconsin. Number 2 was actually an individual that clerked for Justice Antonin Scalia. So that is another thing you might want to know. Number 3, just kind of a personal note, in football and more, she teams with her husband. She and her husband, Jesse, as you might imagine, since they're from Notre Dame area there, they certainly love football, especially on Saturdays. And so, unfortunately, I think I just saw the other day that game has been canceled or postponed, at least because of COVID. Number 4, she was scolded by senator for her faith. We'll get into that in just a minute. Senator Dianne Feinstein in California. The dogma lives loudly within you, and that's of concern, which is what she was told at the time when she was being considered for the Seventh Circuit Court. Number 5, she has addressed moral teaching and the law. She wrote a very key article in Notre Dame's Law Review, Catholic Judges in Capital Cases. by the way. A lot of people have been quoting some of the interaction that she had. I think it was with Senator Durbin on that regard. And then number 6, students named her Distinguished Professor of the Year. And so just some things you might want to know about an individual that might be the next justice on the Supreme Court, or at least the next one to be nominated by President Donald Trump. Now, when you think of that question by Senator Feinstein, it kind of gets us back to Article 6, which says that there should not be a religious test for office. Now, we will have Jeremy Dice with us along with Penner Dexter on Friday. Jeremy has made a case that would constitute a violation of that. Others have said, no, that's not what they were dealing with. They're just trying to understand her judicial temperament. But I'll leave it there. But interestingly enough, what we have seen here is that there has been some really horrific treatment of her already, and it's just factually inaccurate. You know, when people have to make things up, you know they're losing. And I've said before that if you make things up, yes, you might convince the low information voter, the person who doesn't pay attention to the details, but you're probably not going to convince individuals that pay more attention to various political details. And you certainly aren't going to, and somehow convince individuals in the United States Senate. And it so happens that, let's just take the example in Newsweek, which basically took an article from Reuters, which questioned whether or not Amy Coney Barrett was a member of a cult group that actually was the basis for the establishment and the creation of this novel called The Handmaid's Tale. Well, that was written by Margaret Atwood, and what some people have suggested is that she used the people of hope as the justification for writing that. I can, in just a minute, point out that that wasn't even accurate. That isn't accurate, but the point is people have conflated that because Amy Coney Barrett is actually with people of praise, which is very different than people of hope. As one writer put it, this was a shameful and reckless falsehood, perhaps even an outright lie, says one particular writer, Douglas Andrews, and as a result, Newsweek was forced to correct it. But he points out you have to scroll all the way down to find the statement that says Newsweek regrets the error. So this is where, once again, I have such high respect for Senator Ben Sasse. First of all, he's from Nebraska. How could you not love people from Nebraska? Number 2, he's been on the program with us. Number 3, he actually went to Harvard with the son of one of my colleagues. So, you know, we've sort of known of him for some time. But, and by the way, if you see my Viewpoints commentary today, it's where I'm quoting from Ben Sasse on his suggestions on what to save and to change in the United States Senate. But nevertheless, high marks today for Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse, who said, quote, "These ugly smears against Judge Barrett are a combination of anti-Catholic bigotry and QAnon-level stupidity." I love that line. People of Praise is basically a Bible study, and just like billions of Christians around the world, Judge Barrett reads the Bible, prays, and tries to serve her community. Senators should condemn this wacky McCarthyism. Great lines. Again, I have such respect for Senator Ben Sasse. And again, very quickly, let me just point out that people in the media, and I love what Jim Garrity says here, apparently are slow learners, because the people of praise is not the same thing as the people of hope. People of praise, of course, is a Bible study. People of hope is an organization that many people have tried to say was the basis for why Margaret Atwood actually wrote the novel The Handmaid's Tale. But if you go back and look at the evidence for this, he, I think, goes into some details, point out that when there was this first article about the People of Hope, which is kind of a small Catholic sect, that the first story about that came out after this book or this novel, The Handmaid's Tale. Will that change everything? Probably not. You will hear that complete lie and falsehood repeated time and time again. If indeed Amy Coney Barrett actually is allowed to go forward, if first of all she's nominated and is considered by the United States Senate, I guarantee that you will see people out of the Senate chambers who will be dressed like the handmaidens in The Handmaid's Tale. And so this will be an attempt to take something which is actually completely false, because even the people of hope were not the basis for the novel, and she is with the people of praise. But again, as Jim Garrity points out, some of the people in the media are just real slow learners, and they just can't seem to get their facts straight. And so here, if nothing else, I hope you've heard on Point of View an attempt to correct an error, which I guarantee is going to be repeated day in and day out if indeed she is nominated by President Donald Trump on Saturday. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into a couple of other issues, because I've posted some other articles for you to read and to post and maybe use for conversations you have with others. But we need to take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
At the top of the hour, we're going to be talking with our good friend Greg Laurie. But just before we do so, let me mention a couple other articles I've posted for your observation. And one of those is a piece by Beckett Adams. The 1619 Project is a fraud. Now, I might just point out that many of you probably are saying, I've heard it. I don't know what that is exactly. New York Times decided to put together a project. It was actually the New York Times Magazine. And they wanted to actually focus on what they wanted to argue was the 400th anniversary of the beginning of America. And that is, America began in 1619 when 20 African slaves were brought to Jamestown. And so this was an attempt to completely bypass the history that we've always said began maybe in 1620 with the Puritans or in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence or whatever. And by the way, when I talk about 1776, Robert Woodson, who's been on the program with us before, African-American, Woodson Center, I just saw the other day that they have come out with a very good 1776 curriculum because they have now the 1776 Project. I won't get into that because we'll postpone that to another day. But the 1619 Project has always argued that America was started when we brought slaves to America. Wrong. But now everybody with the New York Times Magazine, including Nicole Hannah-Jones, who won a Pulitzer Prize, are saying, no, we never said that. She said on Friday, this particular project does not argue that 1619 is our true founding. She says elsewhere that doesn't argue for obvious reasons that 1619 is our true founding. Well, that's where Beckett Adams says, whoa, wait a minute, this is a brazen lie, and then posts, for example, what was online and in print. Here is the online version. It aims to reframe the country's history, understanding 1619 as our true founding and placing the consequence of slavery and the contributions of black Americans at the very center of our national narrative. Well, they've changed all that now, but nobody's going back saying, we might have overstated the case. Then even if you go to the print edition, Beckett Adams goes on to say that here in the print edition, it talks about a ship appearing on the horizon at Port Comfort and carried more than 20 enslaved Africans who were sold in that. And America was not yet America, but this was the moment in which it began. And then he also posts a Twitter post where you can see Hannah-Jones crossing out July 4th, 1776 and putting in August 20th, 1619. And so if nothing else, I'm all about accuracy and I'm all about telling the truth. And it'd just be simpler if the New York Times would say, you know what, we made a few mistakes, we made a few claims. Matter of fact, they had to change some of the articles. And as somebody pointed out recently, this may be the first time somebody won a Pulitzer Prize that had to be altered in order to win the prize. And now they're altering it again. They're changing it, doing revisionism. And I just thought, since we have talked about the 1619 Project, that article goes into it in some detail. It was in the Washington Examiner. Doubt it'll be in the front page of the New York Times Magazine or in other mainstream articles or newspapers or websites, but you heard it here at Point of View, and I wanted you to know that as well. The last article I've posted here before we get into the election itself is by Gail Trotter. She says President Trump has broken a 39-year streak of American presidents either starting a war or bringing the United States into an international armed conflict. And that was a quote from the Norwegian official who nominated Donald Trump for the NELPRO Prize. Actually, second time he's been nominated. And Gail Trotter points out that certainly Donald Trump has created more peace than the 1994 winner, Yasser Arafat, and certainly more than the 2009 winner, that would be Barack Obama, who basically did not even do anything, but simply got it in terms of the aspirations. And again, Donald Trump was really nominated by the Norwegian official because he was the first president in 39 years not to actually get us into a war or keep us in a war for any length of time, because he's tried to get us out of what he called forever wars. And then if you go a little further down in the article, it mentions the things which I think are just as relevant. The president recognized Jerusalem as the capital, moved the embassy there, withdrew from the Iran deal, was also able to take out the Iranian terror chief also recognized the Golan Heights, although it doesn't say that there. And most importantly, and probably most significantly, was able to broker peace deals with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. And if you think about this, it's been, 72 years since the formation of Israel in 1948. You had the peace deal of Jimmy Carter. Let's give credit where credit is due. That's Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. You might, as a footnote, add the Oslo Accords, maybe under Bill Clinton. I might give a half credit there. But other than that, the only other major peace deal just happened, and you wouldn't know about it if you watched the mainstream press because they completely ignored it. But let's see if the Nobel Peace Prize goes to him. I have my doubts, but we'll pay attention to that for sure. But just before we take a break and spend some time talking with our friend Greg Laurie, I mentioned this yesterday, but most of you probably did not hear. Michigan made a decision the other day because Michigan law says that absentee votes must be in by 8 p.m. on November 3rd. But last week you had a judge actually order officials to keep tallying and counting the ballots up to 14 days later, which I think is pretty amazing because, after all, most people in the Postal Service say that any first-class mail should arrive within 2 to 4 or 5 days, and 2 weeks is an incredible amount of leeway. And so that happened in Michigan, and we broadcast in Michigan. Hello to those of you up there in Michigan. But now, today, we have another story, and that is this one coming out of Wisconsin, because now Wisconsin, like Pennsylvania and what we announced yesterday in Michigan, also have, in this case, a federal judge which has ordered the counting of ballots that arrive by November 9th. Well, that's only 6 days, nothing like the Michigan 14 days. But I think you can now see that 3 of the states that were responsible for the election of Donald Trump and are very key states for the re-election of Donald Trump or the election of Joe Biden are those states I just mentioned, and that is Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And so as a result, because these 3 states are pretty much backed by Democrats, it is really difficult to see how, unless you have just this overwhelming landslide, how we will know who won the presidency on Tuesday night. The Judge Conley, worried that tens of thousands of seemingly prudent, if unwary, would-be voters will heed the deadline of actually having to get their absentee ballot in by October 29th. And yet, interestingly enough, the argument is that Wisconsin's election system would be set up for failure. But you might point out the fact that Wisconsin's not an anomaly because some 14 states count late ballots already, which I think is kind of a tragedy. But most of those don't matter because I love what the editors of the Wall Street Journal said. Most Americans are not going to be on the edge of their seats waiting to find out whether Donald Trump carried the state of California. We already know the answer to that, but we don't know the answer to these very important swing states, and all 3 of them due to Democratic officials and various judges, most of whom, by the way, were Obama appointees. Some were not in terms of the state judges, but they've made it sure that Tuesday night, we have no idea who the president will be unless it's just an overwhelming landslide. So let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover, and there is certainly a lot to cover in this next hour as we talk first with Greg Laurie and then with Ron Smedley. And if you would like to find some of the articles we've been quoting from, guess what? You can find them on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
We're going to have a chance now to talk with our good friend Greg Laurie about a number of things. First of all, his new book out, World Changers, How God Uses Ordinary People to Do Extraordinary Things, published by our friends at Baker Books, and it is now out this month, and you should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link to Harvest so that you can get it there. Also, last time we had him on, we talked about the cinematic virtual crusade, A Rush of Hope. Want to get an update on that as well. Greg Laurie, as you well know, is senior pastor of Harvest Christian Fellowship, author of more than 70 books. We've talked with him in the past about such books as Tell Someone, Lost Boy, which is his own story, autobiography, and many others that we've talked about over the years, and of course have talked about the various crusades in which more than 7.8 million people have attended a Harvest Crusade event. And Greg Laurie, always great to have you on the program with us.
Kerby, good to be with you, and this time I'm on a landline, not AirPods like last time.
Yes, I think a few people might remember that. A while back I had to use AirPods one time for a Zoom call, and they said, take those off, and I thought, I needed to pass that on to you as well. But you were traveling through Montana, and it was nice that you're back on a landline. But we were talking about the Rush of Hope. I heard from your wife, Kathy, the other day, some of the numbers. Can you recount those to our listeners? Because I think a lot of people like to know what happened in that virtual crusade.
Yes, Kerby. Well, as maybe the listeners know, for 30 years we've been meeting at Angel Stadium here in Southern California for what we call the SoCal Harvest. And it's been an amazing event. I think it's the longest-running large-scale evangelistic event in American history. And so we are thankful to God each and every year to see many people come, and on a good weekend, we'll have 100,000 people over 3 nights, and prayerfully and hopefully upwards of 10,000 people making a profession of faith to follow Christ. Well, along came COVID-19, and we weren't able to hold it. So early on, I made a decision to pivot, and I thought, okay, we've been painting on a certain canvas, which in our case was live events and stadiums, and I thought, we're not going to shrink back from proclaiming the gospel, so what can we do? So I had the idea of a cinematic crusade, do something for the screen. Everybody's looking at their screen so much right now. So I went to my friend John Irwin of the Irwin Brothers, who have produced such films as I Can Only Imagine and I Still Believe, and I said, let's do a cinematic crusade together, something that's beautiful, art, for people to view, but with the gospel in it. So I sort of described it as weaponized art, but weaponized in a good way. Like, let's make this art speak, open a heart up, but then at the same time bring a clear presentation of the gospel. So we used elements of films that the Irwin brothers have shot, including Woodlawn, that deals with racial tension, and that's how the show started, dealing with racial tension, looking at what was happening in Alabama in the early 70s and how God intervened and brought reconciliation. We took some scenes from I Can Only Imagine, a story of abuse, a boy abandoned by his mother with an abusive father, and how God was able to redeem that situation and even bring reconciliation with the boy and his father. Bart Millard and his father Arthur, played beautifully by Dennis Quaid in the film. And then lastly, I Still Believe, the story of Jeremy Camp, who's a friend of mine. And so I interviewed Jeremy, who showed scenes from the film. And then I wove the gospel throughout it, and then at the end, a full-blown gospel presentation. So when it was all said and done, we have 3 phases to this. Phase 1 was a social media push. Phase 2 is a television push. Phase 3 is coming out in DVD and video on demand. So Phase 1 is social media only. This is using our platform and many other social media platforms that carry the feed of this hour-long program. A Rush of Hope was seen by 1,800,000 people, and we saw 17,000 people respond to make a profession of faith to follow Christ. So that was a great beginning. So now it's on television, and we bought TV markets around the United States. It was recently on the Fox Business Channel. It was just on Trinity Broadcasting Network for 4 straight hours, and it'll be in other TV outlets, and if people follow me on social media, they can watch it. So that's Phase 2, and ultimately around November, it'll be released on DVD and downloadable video for people to have that they can use now as a tool to reach out to their friends and neighbors.
Let me just mention that we have a link to harvest.org, and you can follow that there. Of course, if you look at the picture of Greg Laurie, we also have a link to his Facebook page, his Twitter account. Of course, I follow him on Instagram. You can do that as well. And so there are lots of great ways to follow that. But let's, if we can, do at least a little bit of service in talking about your book, World Changers, which takes us through kind of Hebrews 11, and the last chapter talks about Hebrews 12. And the subtitle, I think, illustrates it exactly what you want to try to communicate, how God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And when you look through the Hebrew Hall of Faith, sometimes you say, well, these are super saints. But I think as you take us through the book and remind us who these individuals are, okay, we might have a little trouble relating to Enoch, who walks with God. But in most of the other cases, we're dealing with flawed individuals just like us. And that's why God wants us to be the same kind of world changers that these people were.
Yeah, that's right, Kerby. You know, these were ordinary people that God did extraordinary things through. And as you read their accounts, the accounts of them in the Bible is a very honest book. It gives us its heroes, warts and all. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, in the Hall of Faith, they call it the Heroes Hall of Faith, we have Rahab, who was a prostitute. We have Gideon, who was cowardly. We have Abraham, who lied about his wife twice and had a lapse of faith, even though he's known as the man of faith. We have Samson, who had a moral breakdown. We have David, who also had a moral breakdown and even, in effect, committed the act of murder to cover up his sin. Yet all of these flawed people made it into this exclusive club, if you will, a place where people exercise their faith, and that's the operative word. They're ordinary people that did extraordinary things because they put their faith into action. Noah is also in the Heroes Hall of Faith, and probably in the greatest act of faith in human history is when Noah cut down that first gopher wood tree. As the old song says, the kids sing, made out of gopher, barky, barky, right? So, I mean, that was an act of faith. Consider the fact it had never rained prior to Noah cutting that tree down. And the earth was in sort of this terrarium, greenhouse effect. And yet God says, build a big giant boat out in the middle of nowhere. And that's exactly what Noah did. And it took a long time to build it. And the point is, every day he got up in the morning and pulled out his hammer and nails. He was applying faith. And Hebrews 11:1 defines faith as the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So faith is willing to take a risk.
Yes.
Faith sees invisible things. Faith sees what could be. Faith takes risks. And so I just illustrate to the lives of these men and women how they use their faith and how we can use it in our lives as well.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation for just a few more minutes with Pastor Greg Laurie. And if you would like more information, of course, we have a link to harvest.org. You can get a copy of the book there. Of course, you will probably be able to find it in your local bookstore. It came out earlier this month. It is published by our good friends at Baker Books. 11 chapters and just some great material. Final chapter really kind of taking us from Hebrews 11 to Hebrews 12, and we'll talk about some of the secrets of a world changer as well right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The U.S. Senate as an institution is sick and dysfunctional. Senator Ben Sasse, playing the role of physician, provides both an accurate diagnosis and recommended cures, but I fear that the Senate will prefer to remain sick. His first recommendation is to cut the cameras, since most of what happens in committee hearings isn't oversight, it's showmanship. Senators give speeches that are chopped up and shipped to local media. The senators aren't trying to learn, since they're actually competing for sound bites. Senator Sasse also wants to abolish standing committees. The current structure ends up being 20 permanent fiefdoms. Instead, he proposed temporary 2-year committees devoted to making real progress. His third recommendation is to pack the floor. Serious debate, he argues, only happens when senators show up. Most of the time when you see a senator talking on the floor, he or she is speaking to a nearly empty chamber. Changing the rules to allow committees to control some floor time would bring senators to the floor to debate. Senator Sasse also calls for Congress to make a real budget. This certainly is a criticism of the House of Representatives, where revenue bills are to begin. Both houses of Congress have budget responsibilities, but the budget process is clearly broken. He also believes we should repeal the 17th Amendment. Ratified in 1913, this replaced the appointment of senators by state legislatures with direct election. The Senate was supposed to be less influenced by election and more responsible to the states. Although it is unlikely that this recommendation will ever be implemented, doing so would transform the U.S. Senate back into a deliberative body that it was supposed to be. The U.S. Senate should take seriously the proposals set forth by Senator Sasse. Unfortunately, I feel they will be ignored. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Greg Laurie with us for a few more minutes as we talk about his book, World Changers. We're talking about Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Daniel and David and Gideon and so many others, Joseph. And these are great stories that each one of the chapters address. But Greg, just a minute ago, you were talking about faith. And one of the things you talk about early on in the book is faith is a lot like a muscle. And you use a muscle by breaking it down and developing it. And, of course, anybody that's watched you on video knows that you look good in a T-shirt and you look good out there on a surfboard. And so you recognize that working out in a gym and exercising your physical muscles are important. In some respects, your spiritual muscles need to be exercised the same way, don't they?
Well, first of all, thank you for that compliment. You know, I haven't been in the gym for basically 6 months because of coronavirus. I just went back for the first time this week, and oh man, everything is sore after a workout.
I believe it.
But you know, it's true, and even that is a good illustration because you know, we don't work out and we say I have to get in shape. Well, maybe you're in a shape, but it's just not the shape you want. You're in the shape of a pear, and your friends are calling you the Lord's pear, and you don't like that one bit. So you head back to the gym. These are the jokes, Kerby. You got to laugh periodically. So you go back to the gym and you overdo it. And then you're so sorry you never go back again.
Yep.
And that's what can happen to us. You know, I need to get right with God. I need to take a step of faith. And you go out and do something, and maybe it fails. Look, faith is like the muscle. You break it down to build it up. And the more you use your faith, the stronger your faith gets. If you neglect working out, your muscles can atrophy. The same is true of faith. It's a little bit of a use it or lose it. And what I mean by that is you're going to grow it by using it for what it was designed to do. I also liken faith to a four-wheel drive vehicle. You know, it's a popular trend in America to have 4x4 vehicles today, yet a very small percentage of Americans ever take them out into the dirt and let them do what they're designed for. So they just drive these super cool four-wheel drive rigs from car wash to car wash, so they have bragging rights, but they never use the vehicle for what it was designed to do, to get dirty, to climb rocks, to do all kinds of stuff. And faith is given to us to use and to put into practice. And a faith with no works is a faith that does not work. So, you know, our faith in God, our belief in Jesus, is expressed by our faith, which shows itself in things that we do. So I'm just trying to encourage people to say, look, serving God is not as hard as you think it is. God can use really flawed, ordinary people to do amazing things. And not only that, serving God is one of the greatest joys that you can experience in this life. And so I want you to discover the joy and the blessing of having God work through you. And if you are a human being who's had their life changed by Christ, God can and will use you.
You know, that gets into kind of the subtitle of your book, God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And I remember in chapter 10, you were talking about that because we tend to divide people into ordinary and extraordinary. And, of course, we certainly hear about these people that are extraordinary in the sports world and all the rest. But really, you go back to the list and you talk about the fact that some of them indeed were homeless, friendless, powerless.
Yeah.
The world didn't deserve them, making their way as best they could on the cruel edges of the world. This is a challenging time, Greg, in which we're going to have to really challenge people to recognize that there's probably going to be persecution, there's going to be trials and turmoil, and that's when God's people step up and make a difference, right?
That's exactly right, Kerby. And, you know, here in America, there is persecution, not on the scale of other nations in the world, like if you're a Christian living in Iran or North Korea or China. But we do have persecution in America. And Hebrews 11 is a very honest book. The first group of world changers glorified God through escaping. The second group of world changers glorified God by enduring. In other words, it talks about people who quench fires and the, you know, in the mouths of lions. And we think of Daniel in the lion's den, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. But in both instances, God delivered them ultimately. So Daniel was delivered from the lion's den, though he had to spend a night there. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were thrown into the fire, but they survived it. But there's a second group of world changers toward the end of Hebrews 11 that says they were tortured,
yes,
and they were sawn asunder, and they died by stoning. And so you might say, oh, wow, well, maybe the first category, those are the winners, and these folks are the losers. No, they're not the losers. They're all world changers. They're all men and women of faith. And the thing that kept them going, that second category of people, is they knew that there was a reward waiting for them. It says in Hebrews 11:35, they placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. So I know, Kerby, there's someone listening to us right now that has suffered in life. Maybe they have a disability. Maybe they've lost a loved one. Maybe some horrible tragedy has befallen them, and they're asking, why is this happening to me? I see other Christians who don't have any of these problems, and yet here I am suffering. Well, I don't have the answer to your question, but I want you to know that God's aware of what you're going through, and he's going to give you a reward one day in the future. One day, all of these questions will be answered. All of these things that happen will be clarified, but until that day, we have to trust him. So, when you shift from Hebrews 11 to Hebrews 12, it talks about running a race. And the key to this race is you got to run it all the way to the end. We don't want to just start well. We want to finish well.
Yeah, run the race with endurance or with perseverance and those kinds of things.
Yes.
Again, the book is entitled World Changers. Let's, if we can, point people to the website for just a minute, harvest.org. They, of course, will be able to get a copy of the book, but that first drop-down tab is A Rush of Hope. And as you pointed out, if you did not have a chance to hear it on social media, then you have all the different show times. And since we broadcast to more than 36 different states, I won't even go through all all the examples that are there, but you will be able to find those. And so that's the first aspect. Then you have all sorts of resources, Harvest at Home. I know a lot of people tend to still go to their church and then also go to church online with you. So talk about what's available, because you've got some great resources for all of our listeners.
Well, thank you, Kerby. Yeah, we do. We have our website. You mentioned it, harvest.org. We have a daily devotional that we put out there every single day for folks. We have a daily radio program called A New Beginning. And then we have, archives of all of the messages that I've given. And then we have a link to Harvest at Home, which is our weekend service. And then we have just lots of stuff. And not only that, but we have apps for the iPhone and also the Android phone. So you can download the Harvest app and you can listen on demand whenever you want. Plus, there is an app for the Roku box and Apple TV. So if you download that app, you can watch Harvest on your screen at home, like a TV show. You can watch our services live. You can watch them as they're archived, which is basically recorded for you to watch when you want to watch them. So we have tons of options. I have a blog that I write, and the list just goes on and on. I just get tired talking about it. But we love to offer all these resources to encourage people. Our mission statement at Harvest is knowing Him and making Him known. So number one, we want to get closer to Jesus and our own relationship with Him, and that's through Bible teaching and worship and all that. And then making Him known is our evangelistic arm, and that's how we reach out to other people, and that's a big part of what we do.
Again, I love your creativity, too, whether it was a virtual crusade, the Rush of Hope, whether it was the idea of putting out a tent there in terms of the worship services. And I know that Greg Laurie and the people at Harvest are going to continue to use all the creativity and all the talent they have to begin to make a difference and to continue to make a difference in the world. And I just want to challenge everybody to get this book, World Changers, so that you can be a world changer just like they are. So thank you so very much, Greg Laurie, for being with us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, great to be with you. God bless you. Until next time.
We look good forward to the next time. Maybe we can even have him in studio. But again, if you find yourself saying, that went too quickly, I'd like to read the book, well, that is good news because it is out. You probably can find it in your local bookstore, about 230 pages, published by Baker Books. And, of course, we also have harvest.org. If you find yourself saying, I didn't see that virtual crusade, click on that button that says Rush of Hope, and then scroll down, and it actually shows you show times everywhere, whether it's WGN or Fox News or TBN or a local CBS affiliate or all sorts of others where you can watch it and support the film. And of course, then when the DVD's out, we'll tell you about that as well. So they're just all sorts of resources that are tied into Harvest and to the great work being done by Greg Laurie. When we come back from the break, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the issue of drug abuse and recovery. And Ron Smedley with us. Recovery Sunday is coming up, and we thought this would be just a great opportunity for you to, in your church, address an issue, a very important and crucial issue that needs to be addressed right now. So let's take a break. You can find out more about all of what we're talking about on our website, pointofview.net, and we'll be right back.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yes, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
This final half hour, I want to spend some time talking about Recovery Sunday, which is this Sunday. And this is an opportunity, even if you haven't made plans for it, to get some of this information and make a difference in your community. If you've listened to Point of View, you know that we talk about this issue of drug abuse. Matter of fact, here's my booklet on a biblical view on drug abuse. And that problem has gone from bad to worse because we now have almost 21 million Americans who have at least one addiction. The sad reality is only about 10% of them receive treatment. We have moved from just talking about marijuana, cocaine, heroin, now to opioid epidemic and all sorts of other issues that need to be addressed as well. And, of course, we don't want to forget the obvious addiction to alcohol. So those are topics that are going to be on the table for the next half hour. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I want to bring to the microphone Pastor Ron Smedley, an individual that has pastored churches in Mississippi, in Iowa, and in Texas. But in addition to being a minister, has also worked as a parole officer for the state of Texas, a case worker for Child Protective Services. But most importantly, we want to highlight this idea of mission recovery and Recovery Sunday taking place September 27th. So, Ron, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, Kerby. Good afternoon to you and the city of my nativity. It's an honor. I'm a lifelong listener to Point of View, so it's great to be with you today.
Well, I'm certainly grateful that you could be here. And as a former pastor, I guess I shouldn't say former, but one of the numbers I have here is that more than half of all the pastors say that someone in their church is dealing with opioid addiction. By the time you talk about individuals that have any kind of substance abuse, that number just almost goes off the chart. So it does seem to me that one of the things we can do inside the church is to make it a safe place for individuals who are wanting to admit their addiction and wanting to find a place to actually deal with recovery. So talk about this idea of Recovery Sunday, because we have lots of listeners that are pastors, Sunday school leaders, and others that maybe could actually implement what you have planned for this coming Sunday.
Thank you, Kerby. You did an eloquent job of explaining the problem, and Recovery Sunday was basically our vision from we launched 3 years ago. As a former parole officer and pastor, I've seen it from both sides, and I wanted to give a voice to what I feel is the most relevant need in our nation. It's of epic proportions, and frankly, it's even greater now because of the pandemic. So it's just a day that we set aside to at least acknowledge the issue and pray. And then we have some suggestions at recoverysunday.com of how if pastors want to really make a difference and structure their service around scriptures and songs that have recovery theme, and then pray for the seekers and their families at the end. So that was started 3 years ago, and it's every last Sunday in September, corresponding with National Recovery Month.
Let's just mention again that we have, if people click on your picture there, it will take them to recoverysunday.com, or they can simply just type that in either way. And let's talk about the 3 E's: educate, empower, and equip your congregation. How can that be done? And what would you say to pastors and deacons and elders and other individuals that are in position of authority to begin to implement this?
Well, first of all, I think it's the most relevant need in our nation, as I said. And then most people don't think about, on top of the addiction in all of its forms, the ones that get the glamour: alcohol, cocaine, illicit drugs, and opioids, but all forms of addiction. And then the self-medicating behind it. A lot of people have forms of addiction, from video games to overeating, to try to avoid an unpleasant situation. We call it self-medication, to try to escape pain. Opioids are pain blockers in popular medications. They block pain, and they give a sense of euphoria. And when a person experiences that euphoria, they get hooked and addicted. And so we want to come alongside churches to help them engage in this issue, because the church in and of itself should be the greatest support group, because it has the message and the community to be able to help these individuals.
One of the things that I was been struck by is how individuals that seem pretty normal on the outside, seem like outstanding members of community, then begin to see how things like opioids destroy their life. And I've got in front of me here, I think something you're familiar with, an op-ed that came from Deanna McFarlane, and that came out just recently, in which she was talking about how opioids ruined my life, and in some respects started stealing even from her father, cashing checks, buying pills, going to prison. These are individuals that we walk with. You know, sometimes people say, well, I know what a drug abuser looks like. No, you don't. I mean, you may be sitting next to one on the bus. You may be sitting next to one in the church. You may not be aware of how they are dealing with these kinds of addictions. And what we really hope to do is make the church a safe place where people could admit that they are being terrorized in some respects by this addiction that has completely ruined their lives.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for that, Kerby, and thank you for mentioning Deanna. She's a personal friend of mine. She doesn't mind using her name, and I just want to encourage everybody to read that powerful story about a nurse who had a high-paying job, was prescribed 2 pills a day, and the addiction got a hold of her, 24 pills a day, and lying, stealing, went to prison. And you know what's ironic about her story now is this is what Jesus Christ does. He redeems and changes and transforms lives. And not only has she been transformed and set free from addiction, but she's also teaches at a prison that she once was in because of her addiction. And so she's very passionate about telling churches and pastors to get involved in Recovery Sunday, because we want to come alongside you and give you the tools and resources to know how to not only create the culture Kerby was talking about, but a step-by-step process to begin to deal with all the issues 30% of every congregation is struggling with.
And again, a good example is here, since I mentioned her name and since it is okay to mention it, and that op-ed, of course, is available. First of all, taking 1 tablet at night. Then the prescription said, well, you could take up to 2 tablets a day. Within 3 months, consuming 2 tablets 3 times a day. And pretty soon, you know, of course, as you're a nurse, having access to all sorts of things, and had stolen about 500 tablets and then started, you know, downward stripe. So again, if we can catch people when they are starting to say, I think this is getting out of control, this is why you're talking about a Recovery Sunday, where pastors can really say, we're here to help you, even if the church doesn't have a recovery program, and I would hope every church would. They at least say, I can refer you to a place where you will get the help that you need before it completely devastates your life and before you end up in prison and regret a decision that you made a long time ago, incrementally, day after day.
Yes, sir, and thank you again for sharing that. And the story that we just talked about with Deanna, Kerby, those stories, those transformational stories is what I see every day in my ministry. And both as a parole officer and pastor, people get hooked in various ways. And as a parole officer there in the great state of Texas, I spent a lot of government dollars sending people to facilities. But you know what? Churches and pastors can give something that the government can't give, and that's the message of Jesus Christ, the transformation that comes from his love. He says that he came to set captives free and to bind up broken hearts. And what happened with Deanna is happening to hundreds and thousands of souls that are dying every day. They are self-medicated from the pain, and Jesus is the ultimate pain taker.
Let's see if we can take a break. When we come back, though, I thought maybe for just a minute you might talk about what that looks like, because I know that you have information and suggestions about how you could have recovery-themed worship music. You might already think of somebody in your congregation that could give a testimony of what that looks like. Then I know you have suggestions on what might be kind of a recovery-themed sermon, and, of course, there are all sorts of illustrations. And, of course, the Scriptures give us some great opportunities there. And then to even think about after the service, what could happen? Could you maybe have some of the doctors or other healthcare professionals in the community be in the church lobby, for example, and provide information or to point them to recovery services and those kinds of things? And so let's, if we can, we come back, talk about what we can do. I know there is a video or two that people can watch if they would like to know a little bit more about that. So I would encourage people as we go to the break to go to recoverysunday.com and get some of that information from Ron. And if you'd like to join us, maybe you've already done something like this in your church, let me open up the phones too, 1-800-351-1212, or perhaps you're struggling with some of those issues as well, because we are convinced this has always been a problem. It has become a greater problem during the pandemic and the lockdown, and you've heard us talk about this many times. I've done a number of viewpoints, commentaries on that, and we cover a lot of this in our booklet on a biblical point of view on drug abuse. So we'll come back and spend some time talking about this issue, but if you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. During the break, go to recoverysunday.com. We'll talk more about what's available right after this.
Now, back to Point of View. your listener-supported source for truth.
You know, God is in the business of redeeming the lost and restoring hope to those in despair. I think of Psalm 34, verse 18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. So that's why we're talking about Recovery Sunday. We'll take some phone calls in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212. Ron Smedley. But just before we do so, Ron, give us an idea of what could happen. I would imagine right now there's a few pastors that thought, I thought I knew what I was going to talk about Sunday, but you kind of changed my mind. But okay, how do I turn all of this around? Is there enough information at recoverysunday.com to actually pull this together? So what does this entail? Can you give us some ideas of what that might look like?
Well, thank you for that. And first of all, I will say that we know we're late in the game, but if Pastor, if you will just address it, if not this Sunday, we do it every September, but we'll also help partner with you, and we have resources to help take it from here. But it's ultimately to save lives, Kerby, and 120 souls are dying every day. And would you believe 49% increase since the pandemic? So what we ask you to do is, Pastor, acknowledge this. We've got some resources at recoverysunday.com. We've got themes that you can preach on, like identity, forgiveness, freedom from shame, music, powerful testimonies, and you eloquently mentioned earlier about having resources available to those that are looking for hope. But the thing we're most excited about is our free curriculum.
And I might just mention the curriculum, and of course you have a way for people to get in contact. Just click on that button that says contact, put your name, email, and everything, and I know that you will get back to them immediately. Let's, if we can, take a phone call or two. We'll head out to Georgia real quickly. WPMA. Tim, thank you so very much. I understand you're a doctor and would like to help us really understand that there are some alternatives. So talk about that.
Oh, thank you so much, Kerr. I really appreciate what you guys do at Point of View, and this recovery program sounds like it's an awesome thing. One of the things that medical doctors don't get taught in med school is, thanks to, unfortunately, the Flexner report that years ago said that there can't be anything taught about biophysics-based medicine and the treatments that could happen. But recently, the FDA approved a device that's a little targeted pulsed electromagnetic field. And it's called Soft Pulse, S-O-F, then P-U-L-S-E. If they Google that, they could find the device. And they could ask their doctors about it, because most physicians don't know about this. But it's a shortwave signal generator that integrates with cells, and it releases, it's so-called endorphins. It releases the ability for the patient to have less pain. And in research studies that have shown that it decreases pain postoperatively when it is applied to the area where the surgery was by 46% of the need for opioid amounts. So it decreases the amount. And I use it for my wife. She has multiple myeloma, and we use it for her where it hurts, around her ribs and her back. And it makes a difference. So although she may need to have an opioid to help her with her pain because of her cancer, it really does, though, help a lot to keep people from having to have so much opioid. And It is, again, FDA approved, so that people can just ask their physicians. And, of course, they may have to do a little education. So they may have to take this, the Soft Pulse idea to them and have them go to the website so they can learn about it before they write a prescription for it.
Yes.
But it's very helpful.
Anything we can do to end some of the addictions that people have. And again, I'm sure Tim would agree, but Ron, let me come to you just for the few minutes left. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning saying, I'm going to be an addict. I've decided I'm going to go to prison. I've decided I'm going to ruin my life. But nevertheless, through a series of choices, sometimes very small, incremental choices, a lot of people that you've been talking about here find themselves in very difficult situations. As you point out, some of them end up dying. And so this is why I think it is so crucial that the church provide an alternative and really begin to focus on this idea of Recovery Sunday. This is, of course, the third annual. And as you said, it may be too late for some to change their program, but I'm hoping that some might, even in this opportunity here on a Wednesday, rethink about what they want to do this Sunday and tie into some of that. But if nothing else, I hope that even if they don't do it this Sunday, I hope they contact you and figure out how to begin from the pulpit and from the Sunday school classes and from the small groups to say, if you have a problem, and you probably, if you don't have a problem, know somebody who does, who's dealing with addiction. We need to address this issue, and we need to get them on the road to recovery. So this is one of the reasons, Ron, I know why you established this in the first place, isn't it?
Yes, sir. And let me say something very profound, Kerby. What we found is 80% of hurting people come to pastors first when they're looking for help, and we don't always feel equipped. I know as a pastor myself. And as you said, 66% of people in congregations know someone affected by this issue, but over 65% don't have any ministries. So go to recoverysunday.com. We've got a 52-week free, did I say free, curriculum. It's plug and play. It has self-contained videos. It has PDF worksheets. You can get like-minded people, and stats say that at least 30 to 35% of your people will participate in this, and they'll probably tell a friend, and they'll come because it's so relevant. And so we're offering that to you at our website, recoverysunday.com, and we're asking at least that you, this Sunday, that you say, we hear your cry, people are hurting right now, and we want to pray for you. And powerful things start happening when a pastor will do that.
Well, again, Ron, thank you so very much for stepping out and creating Recovery Sunday. Thank you for being such a loyal listener to Point of View, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
I'm honored, and thank you. You guys, please join us. Sign up and help us save lives.
Again, if you are driving right now and don't have a chance to write that down, we have all those links on the website, and you can follow those up. And for some of you in church ministry right now, I hope you'll just click on that contact button and contact him, and he can get you that information instantaneously. Just before we wind down today, let me mention that we have all sorts of interviews tomorrow. Dennis Prager is going to be with us, and we'll be talking about his film, but also maybe a few things that he's been writing about recently. I have the piece here on the 6 things to know about Supreme Court prospect Amy Coney Barrett, who I think will be the nominee, but we'll find that out on Saturday. The 1619 Project is a fraud. Also, the one on Trump and the Nobel Peace Prize. Those just a couple of articles there. But more than that, of course, you might also want to find some of the other resources that we've been talking about that are books. Life is Winning, Marjorie Dannenfelser, World Changers with Greg Laurie, and much, much more. So all of that is available at the website, pointofview.net. And I hope that you'll take the time to find some of those resources, because we are trying to make those available to you on a regular basis. Those of you that, of course, have signed up to actually give on a regular basis to Point of View, $50 a month, receive these booklets. One of those booklets that we sent out was on the issue of drug abuse. And, of course, we've talked about many of the other issues that are addressed every single day here on Point of View. So, again, just want to say thank you for those of you that joined with us on our Truth Team. We have the banner up, but we'll probably be pulling that back down. Unchanging Truth in Uncertain Times. Although I have noticed a few people said, hey, wait a minute, I didn't get in on that. And if you want to click on that button that says join now, you can do so. Of course, at any point in time, you can also, of course, click the button that says donate. And we're so grateful for those of you that have financially invested in this ministry. Tomorrow, we're going to spend some time looking at a little bit more of this nomination that is going to come from President Donald Trump. What does that mean? What is the course of action? What might be the response from the Democrats? We'll continue to look at this election. And, of course, next week we have a presidential debate, which looks like it's going to take place. And we have a better idea now from Chris Wallace, some of the questions and some of the topics that are going to be addressed. So there's a lot to cover tomorrow, as we always will do. And, of course, Friday is our weekend edition. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. Have a great day, and we will see you back here tomorrow on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and